Hello, fellow book readers. My name is John, and today we're going to do a First Law series tier list. So I recently finished the entirety of the First Law series, books 1 through 9, both trilogies and the three standalones, this month. So I just want to talk about them a little bit and go over a tier list. The tiers for this video will be perfect, which are the books that I think, are the top of the top. They're perfection, can't be beat, nothing wrong with them really. Under that would be near perfect. These books may have like one tiny flaw keeping it from the perfect tier, but they're still like amazingly great. And then below that is great. These are books that I would reread any day of the week. I really enjoyed them. I loved them a lot. And then below that is enjoyed but flawed. And these are books that I still thought were good, but they were definitely a little bit more flawed. They're probably books I'm not reaching for to reread. Under that is did not enjoy. These are books that I just did not enjoy really. I thought they were a little bit too flawed. They just wouldn't for me. And then under that is hated it. These are books that I absolutely hated. Spoiler alert: there will be no books in the hated it tier. I didn't hate any of these books that much. So let's get started with the first book in the series, and that is The Blade itself. It's the first book in the original trilogy, again by Joe Abercrombie. This book was an enjoyable experience for me. I am going to put it in the enjoyable but flawed spot. And the reason I say that is because while I did like this book and I wanted to continue after reading it, there just isn't really a whole lot of plot in this book. There's almost no plot. And it's quite confusing to read because the characters themselves are not super likable either. So you're reading a book with characters that really aren't likable and that has no plot. So why do you keep reading? Because the world is interesting and the characters are interesting. They're morally gray. They keep you guessing. And by the end, you really do get to enjoy these characters. You accept them even though they are flawed, and I really liked that. And as the book went on, Giselle really grew on me. I really liked Glotka's plotline. Logan Ninefingers, he never really got good for me, especially in this book. But I really enjoyed Pharaoh too. Now there isn't a lot of Pharaoh in this book, but the one plot point that moves is towards the end of the book where Logan and Pharaoh like fight these, I don't know what they are, I guess Gurkish people, and that plot point does move. It's the only plot point that moves, but it sets up the second book in a really good way. And over it all, you have this wizard, Baez. He looms over the entirety of this book. And Joe tries to make you believe he's good, but I knew right away this guy was just, you can't trust him. He's probably the antagonist. I knew right away. Like, right away. It was so easy to sniff out, in my opinion. But it was really good character work here, even though, again, these aren't characters that you're going to love right away. Okay, next up is Before They Are Hanged. I am going to put Before They Are Hanged in the great tier. I really like this book a lot. I would reread this book any day of the week. The plot really starts moving here, and I think it adds depth to some of the characters. So, you get the Glotka siege, and I think the siege that Glotka is part of is one of my favorite sieges I've ever read. It was so freaking good, and it wraps up sort of, I won't say anticlimactically, but in a way that you probably would be expecting more to happen. But it was really a brilliant way to wrap it up still. And then you got Giselle, Pharaoh, Logan Ninefingers, and Baez going to the end of the world to find the seed. And that plot point has some interesting action scenes going on in it, including Giselle getting disfigured. And I think it adds a lot to his character. I do think he is the best character in the series, in my opinion. And I really enjoyed his character arc throughout this. It made me really sympathize with him and learn to like him. I think he's the closest to like a pure protagonist in the original trilogy. But what I really loved about this seed arc is how menacing Pharaoh was. Pharaoh was such a menace, and you really get to know her character in here, unlike in the first book where she's like the point of view character you get to know the least. In this book, you get to know her a lot, and she quickly became one of my favorites. Such a good character, but her journey coincides with a lot of world building. So you get the magic world building here, and the god world building, and the wizard world building through this like arc in the story. And I think the world building here was superbly great. And then in the North, you get West's storyline, and West is kind of a bastard after what he did to his sister in the first book. And personally, I just did not find his story to be very engaging, and it wasn't because of him. I think, Joe did a good job trying to redeem him, and I did kind of buy it. But the problem was, I just find the North to be the least engaging setting in the series. So the stuff in the North really dragged the pace down for me, and that's what keeps this book from getting into like the near perfect or perfect tier for me. But other than that, this book was phenomenal. Okay, next up is The Last Argument of Kings. This is my favorite book I've read so far this year. I think it is a perfect book. Everything about this book worked. I loved how the characters sort of grew in this book. Of the Giselle, he becomes king, and it's like you realize he's a good person with like morals. The same can be said for Glotka. He doesn't become king, but he becomes like basically the art, whatever the like top inquisitor is, and sort of like Bias's right hand man, but sort of like against his will. He's not on Bias's side, but he has to be on Bias's side. But at the same time, he's trying to, you know, do the good that he can do. And I really enjoyed how much Giselle and Glotka grew throughout this book, but at the same time, not every character grows. Pharaoh does not. And I think that was perfectly done by Joe. Because if Pharaoh grew and became like this great person, to me, that would have felt very unrealistic and weird. And I'm glad she didn't. Like, her storyline ends the same way it starts. She's still this like menacing figure, and I'm glad that her and Logan's relationship didn't like go farther than it did because those two didn't really work for me together. I really, really enjoyed almost how every character's arc went in this book. West, he tragically dies after like redeeming himself. I thought that really worked. I enjoyed even some of the minor characters' arcs, like Artie. I thought Artie was great here. Bias, he reveals himself as like the big antagonist, but he also saves the city at the same time, although not without costing like thousands of lives. Uh, it was all really, really interesting. I don't think Logan Nine Fingers actually was very interesting. So there is one character that just didn't work for me, but thankfully he didn't like slow the book down at all. So for me, this is still a perfect book. I loved this book. It had like 300 straight pages of action almost, but the action was mixed with some great character work. And I thought the series ended both like in a really good spot, but also like was able to set up future books in the series at the same time. Really excellent way to wrap up the original trilogy. Okay, then next up we start the standalones, and the first standalone is Best Served Cold. It's my favorite standalone in the series. It's actually my second favorite book in the series. I love this book. It is a great revenge story. It is actually my favorite fantasy revenge story that I've ever read, and that includes, Miss Bonera 1 with Kelsier and Orca from the Bloodsworn Saga by John Gwynne, and a few others. But yeah, Manza's revenge story is perfect, and I really loved the cast of characters from the overly cartoonish Master Poisoner to Shiloh Vitari, who I just didn't think we got enough of in the original trilogy, and a few of the others. Casca, just great story by Casca here. Uh, Carl Shivers, I thought his story was awesome and the trauma he goes through and how this thing comes full circle how he was going for a peaceful life, but then he realizes that's not who he is. It all really, really worked for me. The climax was awesome. I love the big twist where we really find out Manza, her main character, who was trying to get revenge, her brother was actually like kind of the bad one. We find that out at the end, and I thought it was a great twist. But even with that twist, you're still rooting for Manza. I don't know how Joe managed to do that, but he did. It was perfect, and I thought the opening chapter is one of the best opening chapters I've ever read, where Manza and her brother are killed. Well, her brother was killed, and she was attempted, and they like attempted to kill her too, the king. I loved all of the story followed like a line. She had like a list, sort of like Arya Stark, where she was going person to person to get revenge, and I loved each of those chapters. I thought they were all good. Uh, but it had some real growth to it at the same time because our main character Manza grows organically in this book. It doesn't feel like false at all. It all really, really worked for me. So yeah, this is gonna go in the near perfect tier for me. I don't think it like peaks as high as like say a perfect book usually does. This is why it's like one tier lower. But there's really no flaws with this book at all. It's near perfect. Sorry, I just had to do a little last minute resizing. Let's move on to the next book, The Heroes. This is a lot of people's favorite standalone and some people's favorite book in the entire series. This is probably my most controversial pick, but this is actually my least favorite book in the series and the only book I actively found no enjoyment in reading. Yeah, so this is going to go in the I did not enjoy tier, and I will explain why. This book is just one giant battle in the north on the hill called the Heroes, and frankly, that's just not how I love my fantasy books. I don't love my books to just be all action, and this book is like 85% action, I would say, maybe 80%, or maybe I'm being a little harsh, but it's mostly action, and I don't feel that action really develops character work either, like it did in, say, The Last Argument of Kings. I feel it's just sort of mindless action. And I find the North to be the least engaging setting. And I'll explain why. It is because I think it creates the least diverse characters personality wise. Everybody from the North, all they ever want to do is fight and be warriors. And most of the characters here were either born in the North or are Northern. And all they want to do is fight and kill. And it to me, that's just not like fun. Like reading, like they all feel very similar personality wise, and I just felt like I was reading the same characters over and over and over again in this book. And there's a lot of point of view characters here, and frankly, they all fell flat for me besides Calder. I thought Calder's plot here saved the book from getting in the I hated it tier. He had a semi interesting plot line. It wasn't enough to save the book for me, but I did enjoy his plot. And there were some moments with, I think her name is Rinfrey or Finry. I don't remember which one. She had some interesting moments here as well, but not her entire plot, just some like interesting scenes. So that is my thoughts on this. I am glad Baez showed up in this book because he was, you can feel him plotting behind the scenes, which I thought was perfect because he's just so unlikable, despicable character. Yeah, but that's my thoughts on this book. I just really didn't love this book, and I think a lot of that is due to the setting and the choice of like plot, where it's just one giant battle. Okay, next up is Red Country, which is the third and final standalone in the series. And I really like this one. I put it in the great tier. I would reread this any day of the week. Now, I think part of that is because this book feels the most different from many of the books in the series. It has really two main characters. I think there's three or even four point of views, but really two that dominate the book. And they are definitely the characters that are the most pure in the First World Law series. They really aren't morally gray. Shy and Temple, uh, they're maybe like a tinge morally gray, but like barely at all. They're really easy to root for protagonists, and that was refreshing to read after reading like five books with these point of view characters that are not like super easy to root for. So the book feels different that way. It's also kind of a Western. I'm not a big Western person. I think that's part of the reason why it ends up in great and not like higher. But I also just don't think it peaks as high as some of the books that are ahead of it. So for me, it's going in the great tier. It's going to go right behind Before They Are Hanged. I don't think it's better than Before They Are Hanged, but right behind it, I think is a good spot for it. And then we start with the Age of Madness trilogy. And the first book in the Age of Madness trilogy is A Little Hatred. I thought this was an improvement on what he did with the Blade itself. So again, it's a whole new cast of characters. This takes place 30 years after the first Law trilogy ends, and we get some of the sons and daughters of characters from the first trilogy, and then just some new characters overall. But there's actually some plot in this book, so it feels very much like the Blade itself, but with some real plot. So you get like the start of like the what I would call the French Revolution, like it's Joe Abercrombie's version of the French Revolution in this book, and that's with like this uprising in this town. Now, keep in mind, his version of the Industrial Revolution is also going on, and that is why people are rebelling because they don't like all the industry that's happening, all the machines taking jobs and long labor hours. So you get the start of that in this town with Savine, who was actually Glotka's daughter from the first book. I thought that was perfect, and Urso comes, who's Giselle's son. It so that's really interesting. And then you also have this duel in the north. And like I said, I don't really love northern plot lines, but this duel actually got me really invested. I don't know why, but it did. Between Stour, who is Calder's son, and Leo, who is Rinfrey's son. So So yeah, that really worked for me too. So you have these two plot lines, and they both really work. They carried the book. Now it's only two plot lines, so it's not like there's this big plot going on. It's really simple plot lines, but they are there. So I enjoyed that this first book had plot. And then you get all the characters. So there's 7 point of view characters, and I thought 5 of them were hits. This series point of view characters is much more balanced than the original trilogy, because like Savine is awesome. Urso's my favorite. Great character, awesome character, and he's almost pure. Like he is morally gray for sure, but he's less morally gray than any of the characters in the two trilogies. So that is very interesting. And he's the prince, and he becomes the king at the end of this book because his father dies mysteriously, likely from poison. We never actually find out who did it, but I would assume it would be Baez. Could have been Glocka though. We're not 100% sure. And then there's Vic. She's sort of the calming presence. She's an inquisitor, but she's different from the rest. She's more, I won't say shy, but she's definitely less loud and more calm than some of the other characters in the series. Very easy to root for her. And then you got Ricky, who is like this witch that can see the future in the north, and I really digged her storyline here. I thought she had some very interesting character development. And then you got Leo, who is I'm gonna say it, he's just an idiot, but he, I don't think he's like easy to root for. As a matter of fact, you're gonna probably be rooting against him for most of the story trilogy, but I do think he's a very interesting character to read. Now, I will say Broad and Clover are kind of misses for me in this book, but that's fine. This book was still great. It's going at the bottom of the great tier, but it was still great. And then we got The Trouble with Peace. This is the second book in the Age of Madness trilogy, the eighth book in the series. And I thought this book was near perfect. I really loved this book. Almost everything about it was great. It reminded me of The Last Argument of Kings in that there's just this giant battle at the end, but it's interspersed with like some really great character work. So yeah, that really, really worked for me. In this book, we find Leo, like I said, the idiot from the north. He is starting a rebellion against the Union, and he's being encouraged by Savine, Glotka's daughter, who, now that she can't marry Urso because she finds out he's her brother, wants more power. And it just goes really poorly for them. So yeah, I really really enjoyed that because Urso is very easy to root for, and I loved how Urso takes command and tries to fight back against the rebellion because he really doesn't deserve it, and he wins in the end, but it costs him a lot of his army, and he doesn't know in the background there's sort of a plot going on between the revolutionaries in his own country trying to overthrow him. And we find that out through Vic, who Vic has a lot of great scenes in this. She's not in the book as much as I wanted her to be, but the scenes she has in this book are amazing. Where she meets with Shank and Shiloh, I love that plot line. I thought that was like a really, really, really great scene. And then the end, obviously, where she finds out what's really going on with the revolution in that one town. Really, really worked for me. So yeah, that really worked for me. And then you also got Ricky's transformation. She goes to this like ice cavern almost with this witch, and she wants to stop being able to see the future like every 2 seconds. She wants to learn how to control it, and she gets all these like weird tattoos and runes on her face, and she becomes sort of like this mythological witch. And I thought that was done really, really well. And her plot line where she like sort of betrays Leo and uh, and fights against Calder's son behind his back was perfect. I really love that. It worked really well. I think Clover and Broad continued to be misses here, and that's probably the only thing keeping it from being like in the perfect tier. Otherwise, this book would be perfect. But for now, I'm gonna put this behind Best Served Cold in the near perfect tier. Okay, and then we get the final book in the series, The Wisdom of Crowds. And for me, this is going to go in the enjoyed but flawed tier. I'm going to put it ahead of The Blade itself, though. I just didn't love the end of this book. This book was tragic instead of bittersweet, and it didn't really serve a point because it didn't accomplish anything. So I think if you're going to do a tragic ending, it has to accomplish something, and this doesn't. Like we, Urso gets executed at the end of this book. Again, it's the French Revolution. Basically, he's essentially King Louis. It doesn't really make any sense though, because we find out Glotka from the first trilogy has actually been behind this revolution the entire time. to sever Bias's strings from controlling the Union. And that's great and all, and it makes sense because Bias is a bastard and totally evil. But his plan doesn't make any sense because he's just taking away his banks, going after the banks, but he doesn't actually attack Baez or put in any plan to actually stop him from like retaking over the Union. Baez is still alive, and we see at the end of the book he's planning in the North how to retake it, and it doesn't. It just like Baez is smarter than that. Like it feels very out of character for me because Glotka should be a better politician than he is here, and his plan doesn't make any sense. It felt like Joe just wanted to write the French Revolution, and he wanted to have Orso die like tragically, but like the reasoning for it is really stupid and it doesn't make any sense and it doesn't accomplish anything. And this is a fantasy. I feel like you have to accomplish something, and this doesn't accomplish anything. Now, I do think some of the character work in this is great. I think Urso again just amazing, very easy to root for him. I wish he was in this book more. He's just like imprisoned basically the entirety of the book because like to take the capital of the Union, the plot to take the capital of the Union happens like in the very beginning. So he's like imprisoned basically the entire book. I think Savine is really the MVP of this book. Uh, her plot line to try to like stop Leo and like gain power herself, but also free Orso was very easy to root for, and you could like sympathize with her because she's definitely sad that Orso dies at the end. Although we don't actually see Orso's body, so maybe he'll be back in a future series if there is one. We don't know, but probably not. I don't think it's likely. Then Leo is a bastard, like just evil. Hate him with a passion. It's his idea to kill Orso. He's awful, the worst person. But his chapters were very engaging and easy to read. And then Vic finally gets away from the Union in this book, and I really enjoyed that. Her plotline from front to back in the series is one of the highlights. Just such a great plot. And she's Team Orso. She finally chooses the losing side this time, which is perfect because that's what she should have been doing a lot uh, to be based on her backstory. I think she has the best backstory of any character in this trilogy. And then Ricky, she makes a choice to like betray Urso at the end, and you can tell it's going to weigh heavily on her heart the entire time. And I actually do feel bad for Ricky because it was the right choice for her kingdom, but the wrong choice for her personally, and it's just very sad. I thought Clover here siding with Black Calder and fighting against Ricky was actually kind of interesting. This was definitely Clover's best book. The only time I was really interested in reading him. Broad state of miss, and that didn't help this book at all, I would say. But yeah, between the ending and like the logic around the rebellion not making much sense, uh, this book is going to fall in the enjoyable but flawed category for me, which is kind of a shame. And I didn't read Sharp Ends, so I'm not going to rate that. That's the short story collection. I will probably read it one day. I am definitely a short story person. I have my top 50 short stories on this channel somewhere. So I am looking forward to reading that at some point. But I want to continue on reading some other novels in the meantime. And that's my list. So let me know down below if you agree, disagree, where you would rank some of these books, what your favorite first law book is. And as always, thanks for watching.